Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. We're doing something a little bit different today where we are actually returning to talk about Thief in a part 2 episode, something we've never done before as far as I'm aware.
Yep.
But we had a hard out last week, so we decided we'd come back and give this movie the full attention it deserves because it is a great movie. I think it's both of our... did we talk about how it was our favorite Michael Mann last week? Or did
I don't
go
know.
through that? I can't remember.
Yeah, no, I don't know that we went all the way there. We'll revisit it real quick. I know that, as with all of our episodes, we started, the last episode, the first part of Thief, with kind of our personal first kind of, viewings and our kind of, our personal relationship to the film and everything. But I don't know that we went that far. But now that you've brought it up, I'm assuming this is your favorite Michael Mann film?
It's definitely, I would say that it revolves in the one or two spot quite frequently for me. I would
Yeah,
guess, yeah.
So I'm always I really stink at the the rankings, the top 10,
me
the
too.
best 10. Like
Yeah.
I tell people it's kind of funny. I'm like, look, I love cinema in the way that even bad movies I love to watch. Like I love movies so much that I love bad movies. Like I love all kinds of movies. Like I will, if I haven't seen it before, I will give it a shot, and I will, and I go into every movie wanting to love it. So it's like my love affair with cinema is such that there are so many films that I love for so many different reasons that. And it's the same with Michael Mann. There are so many of his films that I really love. Like I think Collateral is an absolute gem of a film.
Yeah, me
Heat
too.
is
Yeah.
obviously a superb film. So for me, it would probably be it's close with these three, with Thief, Collateral, and Heat. But, there are aspects of this film that, boy, I mean, it's right up there. It's right up there. I really
Well, I
do.
know,
Yeah.
we sort of talked about this last week too, but I think one of my favorite things about this movie is just how simple it is and how, not to retread anything from last week
Right.
in case, I don't want to bore people, but like, I think that's one of the things that makes this movie really special to me is just that it's a really simple, straightforward story that
I think straightforward is a better way to say it, because I think
yes,
and I think we got right about to the conversation that James Caan, his character, and Tuesday Weld, her character, Jesse and Frank, their conversation in the diner, where he kind of lays out his kind of life philosophy, having learned the hard way in prison, spending most of his young adulthood in prison. And Tuesday Weld kind of, there's a hint at her having had a pretty tough life before this, and as she's approaching kind of middle age, working in this diner. And so I think, yes, it's straightforward, but I don't know if I would say that it's simple. And we can kind of talk about that a little more as we walk through the rest of the film. But I think there's a clarity to the film. There's a and not just with the plot. And we talked about this in the last episode, where there's not a lot of plot kind of contrivances or mechanizations that. You're absolutely right. It's straightforward, but I think that there's a lot to chew on, though.
There's a lot of depth. By simple, simple, I didn't mean there's no depth. I meant more just that it's, like you said, it's straightforward. Like there's an A and a B, and it's like, what works in this movie is the character. It's very character focused as opposed to a plot with a million moving pieces and things like that. So it's it doesn't. You're not distracted by trying to follow all of the machinations of like, who's betraying who's on what side, who's doing this. Right. You're actually it kind of frees up your mental capacity to really focus on the characters and what they're actually going through and what their motivations are and things like that, which is I think of what makes this movie really interesting.
Well, and it's and we talked to. I mean, it's a film about tone, and I think we talked about especially from my perspective, that I feel like where, generally speaking, my favorite cinema, and I think where cinema often really shines, is when the that's used as kind of a tone poem, as opposed to trying to convey extremely complicated plots with lots of moving pieces. And maybe that's just personal preference, but I also tend to kind of think that given the format of having 90 to 120 to 150 minutes, generally speaking, when I see films that are maybe less successful, it's when they try to cram a lot into that. Maybe that's better suited for a miniseries or a TV show. But I think there's a lot existentially in this film. And so, to kind of, bring us back into the film itself, so like I said, last episode, we ended with them in the diner, which I think is one of the real standout scenes. And you had kind of talked about, emotional set pieces versus actual real physical set pieces, which of course Heat had more of, Collateral had more of. Those are larger budget films. But then we go into, okay, now, and I think this is interesting as kind of a heist film in a sense. Now we go into, okay, Frank's got to plan this big heist, right? Or this to crack this big safe, to do this big job.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is so successful about this film is, look, I don't know anything about cracking safes. I don't know anything about breaking into banks. But man, when I watch this film, I sure do feel like I'm in the hands of somebody. As an audience, I feel like I'm in the hands of somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Yes.
Now I'm sure technologies have changed since then, but I feel like when this film came out, you're watching this. It's my understanding that Michael Mann went to great lengths, and so did James Caan, to get the details, to get the specifics of this, and the techniques that would be used, and the type of safe, and the brand, and all these different things, to get that stuff as accurate as possible, and having
to the point where when he's cracking that safe, it's Michael Mann just filming him actually breaking into the safe, step by step, right?
Well, and I think we talked about the opening scene where Caan is actually, he is really breaking into the safe. He's using real tools. It's I think here too, for example, where we've got Frank, he's talking to his I don't know, like what would you call this? Is he a metallurgist, or what is that? But he's talking to his buddy, this old, his old buddy here, like, okay, hey, this is the kind of safe I got to break into. What can you build for me? How are we going to do this? And he creates this, and it really becomes kind of like it's beautiful in the sense that this burning bar, or this like long iron or steel pole that I think has like magnesium or some other kind of combustible.
One of those really hot burning. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like, I almost imagine it as like just a supercharged giant sparkler. You remember those like sparklers for, you'd have as a kid, and, which is ridiculous, of course, because I remember having these sparklers. For here in the United States, fireworks were a big part of July 4th celebrations. But
yeah, same here with Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember, it's funny because they would say like these are child safe, like these are what you should use for children, and I literally remember burning my die cast literally, like I had these little Matchbox cars that back then they were made out of die cast steel, and I remember I could melt steel with enough of those sparklers put together, because it was like like oxygen and magnesium put together in these sticks, and they would burn at like thousands of degrees.
Yeah, we used to always tie a bunch of them together and light like a big one off. Like
and so,
be like brighter than the sun.
Yeah, and so it's crazy they would give those to children, but that's basically what they build here. It's like a burning bar, and this is a real thing. And it's like, look, the safe design is such that you can't drill into it. You wouldn't know where to drill. You might have to drill at 100 different places to find the actual correct location. So they're literally just going to go and cut open a hole through the front of the safe.
Yeah.
And which is genius, because on the one hand, well, this is accurate. This is actually something that exists. This is a real thing. Of course, most of us would have never known this. And so it also is kind of one of those cool, I love it when a film kind of successfully brings me into a universe I don't know anything about, but that actually exists, right? It's like, this is the inside baseball kind of stuff that, you really feel like, oh, wow. Like I'm like learning a little bit about how this might be done in real life. Whoa, this is kind of wild, So I feel like this film does that so successfully. But it's also so beautiful visually, right? I mean, it's like actually kinetic and like powerful visually, such that I mean, most of the posters I've seen actually use, it's like a background of all the sparks arcing out of this burning rod or whatever burning bar.
Yeah.
With Khan's face kind of like juxtaposed over it with those safety dark glasses that he has, so
those big the like
yeah, and I mean it was like so visually stunning, arresting, and beautiful. They literally used that as the motif for the poster, which it's just brilliant, right? And I think throughout the film you talk about how it's simple, but I think it's visual density, like the efficiency and effectiveness of the visual storytelling, I think is just something that Mann has time and time again shown himself to be so good at,
Yeah. No, Mann is like someone who has such a specific, not like his visual style matches his tone so well that it's like almost it's become its own trope in a sense. Like,
oh, for sure.
You look at like even something like Grand Theft Auto owes like its entire aesthetic to Michael Mann.
A ton.
The Christopher Nolan Dark Knight movies as well, like they're so very clearly pulling from Michael Mann's kind of like
they're nowhere edited.
For worse.
Yeah, they're nowhere edited.
No,
as
yeah.
Good
Well,
as
there
Michael
you go.
Mann's
That's Nolan's. I don't think we've done a Nolan movie yet, but if we ever do, we can talk about Nolan's magical editing. But you can totally tell that, like, especially the Dark Knight, he's just basically trying to do heat in the world of Batman, right? And so I think that's one of those things. I mean, you look at someone like a Spielberg or a Hitchcock, or even like a Sergio Leone, like you have these certain directors who they're described as auteurs for a reason, because they have a total authorship over their work that resonates with people on like some level, whether conscious or subconscious. And Michael Mann is someone who I would describe as doing that without, I wouldn't say not sticking to a genre, but almost like he will apply his touch to all of these different types of stories, and kind of his interest is always on this like lonely man with this arc and this trek who's like going on this like self journey, and that's really what Thief is about too. And you can see that again echo through all of his films, and even
Obsession,
like Manhunter, I think Manhunter's always funny to me because you watch whatever I guess Red Dragon would have been the remake of that years later in the 2000s with Edward Norton. And that one came out obviously after Silence of the Lambs, and I love Silence of the Lambs. I mean, we did Silence of the Lambs for this podcast really early on. But you look at Manhunter versus Red Dragon. Red Dragon's clearly trying to make it like a thriller, like it's got what's his name in it, Lecter and all that, like
Hannibal Lecter,
Anthony why am I blanking on his name? Anyway,
Anthony Hopkins. Tony Hopkins. There you go.
And whereas Manhunter is through and through a Michael Mann movie, like he's presenting Manhunter, and he tonally shoots and edits Manhunter like a crime drama more than like a serial killer thriller film,
right?
And so I think that's just something that you just have like incredible authorship, and I think that goes again with less so the way that he writes and more so the way that he like edits films and kind of like composes his scenes, where they're so about atmosphere, they're so tonal. And so something as simple as breaking into a safe can be such a standout scene. Like, it's not even like they're doing like a Mission Impossible, in through the vent height. I mean, they're sort of,
or like Ocean's 11 or
where it's not like a big flashy complicated plan. It's let's stick this big hot rod in the safe and open it. And yet the way that he shoots it is so stark and so like visceral that it ends up on the poster. Like it ends up being such a standout moment of the film.
Agreed. And I think you had started to talk about this last episode, and this is when we kind of found out, hey, we're out of time and there's so much more that we want to say about this film, and maybe this is as good a time as any to kind of talk about it, even though we've still got quite a bit of the film left to touch on. But the soundtrack is such an integral, such a huge part of that. There's long sequences here, right? The entire first sequence of the film, when they have their first successful, is it a heist? I guess, is it still a heist?
I guess it's a heist, yeah.
Robbery. Robert, sorts, yeah. And then of course you've got long sections here later on in the film. I mean, the whole second heist, right, is very little dialogue at all. You've got the Tangerine Dream soundtrack is just it's forefront, right? I mean, we're almost watching like a music video, almost in a sense, right? And so the soundtrack is so pivotal. It's so vital to this. It's so key to helping create and maintain that atmosphere, and to build the suspense and to just it's so pivotal to that tone. I can't imagine this film with any other soundtrack. You know, what's fascinating, what I found out about was that this is a piece of trivia that kind of blew my mind, but I'm not surprised in a way. So apparently, the year this film came out was the second year of the Razzies. Now, do you know what the Razzies are?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Yeah. And Tangerine Dream won the Razzie for worst soundtrack for Thief.
Well, hey, there have been a lot of really great movies that have won Razzies, so
yeah.
So I don't. I would wear that as a badge of honor if I were. Maybe I'll tell them that if I ever meet them.
I'm sure they're not worried with the amount of success that they've had since then. Now this is only the second film that they scored. Of course, Sorcerer being the first. I'm not sure if we mentioned that in the first part of the first episode. So I mean that's so pivotal. And I think, you know, you talked about how Mann has such an identifiable style. And whether that was, you know, him executive producing with Miami Vice, but of course Miami Vice was a key, one of the first television shows to really kind of marry the soundtrack to the visual and almost have, you know, whole sections that were just, you know, dialogue free, almost kind of like a music video. And it was which of course was a big, you know, it's like MTV was becoming a big deal back then with Miami Vice. And so it was a part of the whole kind of zeitgeist of that era, right? Michael Mann was a huge part of that. And I feel like it's such a key aspect of the success of this film, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's just, you know, but then we have this huge shift, though. We have a scene. So one of the real standout scenes, in my opinion, and especially from a performance perspective, and particularly with James Caan's performance, is when they go to the, when Jesse and Frank go to the adoption office. I don't know, whatever, you know, the social services, office, whatever. Yeah. And you've got this superb scene. I think, again, there's just enough of these here where we get such a wonderful sense of James Caan and kind of the world that he's grown up in, and how that world is in some ways so similar, but kind of different than the square world that he's trying to like reintegrate into and navigate. And I think, you know, one of the real standouts to me is when, you know, I mean, clear, like he's it's just so interesting that he's kind of trying to be, you know, he's got the expensive suit, he's got the expensive silk shirt, he's got the expensive shoes, he's got the Rolex watch, he's got the, you know, the, what is it, the 3-carat, you know, perfect diamond ring. You know, he goes into the spiel a couple
times. It's like
times
a union ring almost, as funny.
About, yeah. And it's like these are, in a way, it's kind of like how he had kind of distilled almost, you know, in a childlike way, his version of success, which was that collage, which is like, here's my house, here's my car, here's my wife, here's my baby, here's my friend Okla.
It's like he's trying to prove himself to.
Well, it maybe, but what my take, like, and in a second, come back to that and tell me what you mean by that. But it's almost a critique of how most of us kind of actually do. I mean, in a way, these things are the markers of success for most people, but in the way that it's presented with Frank and his character, it's almost like a commentary on, I don't know how, I'm exploring this kind of right now for the first time, so bear with me, which I sometimes do here, but it's like, there is a naivete and a simplicity, but it's also a truth. Like having a family and he's distilled it to a really simplistic level,
Mm-hmm.
but but it's like, but you do see a sincerity of care, and there's some kind of relationship happening between him and Jesse. It's not just that, like he wants a child, and I think like you see him being tender with Jesse in scenes, and you see that. I mean, we almost have this idea that he would be a good parent. Strangely,
Mm-hmm.
right. I mean, I don't know what you. Obviously, we don't ever get to go there in the film. Something entirely different has to happen. But you almost get a sense he would be a good father, right? Like this scene,
Mm-hmm.
he's talking about like, look, I grew up and without a family.
In foster
i
care,
i
yeah.
know what this is. I know what foster care is. I know how horrible this is. Look, I ended up being a criminal. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's got on his job application, or on his, like, what's your job history. He's like, she's like, oh, you worked for the Department of Corrections. What did you do? He's like, I made desks or whatever he says, and
Yeah.
it's like, no, I was in there. I was a felon, lady.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was doing time. You're not understanding. And I think it's interesting how he's so outside this world, and it's like he will never be. I think we see here he's never going to be a part of this world. Maybe when he's in his bar, when he's on his car lot, when he's in his world, when he's in his element, when he's
Mm-hmm.
casing a heist and he's performing a heist, he's the end all be all, alpha omega of that world. But when he's in this world, he sticks out like a sore thumb. And it's, I mean, even when he's not wrong, when he's like, well, look, what is this going to take? Here's my diamond ring, here's my Rolex, what, and she's like, this isn't the market. Well, we actually kind of really realize, I mean, it kind of is a market, but in a different way. It's just not in a market in the same way, that it's not so blatantly. You have to kind of keep that stuff kind of under wraps, right? You can't
You can't.
speak
Yeah. You can't
directly to
admit
it.
that. Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
admit that, right? It's no, we're above that. No, but are you really above that, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things going on in the scene, but I get a sense that, I don't know. I get a sense he would actually possibly. There's a good chance he'd be a decent father.
Well, he would certainly care about the kid.
That's the sense you
And
get. That's the
and
sense you get. Yeah.
that's sort of what I mean by, like, when I say, like, the idea that he's wearing this stuff to kind of prove something. That's his. He almost has a hyper distilled view of how society operates. That everything is transactional. So to
Mm-hmm.
him, which is true in a sense, like you were
And
saying,
it is.
like
It
this
is.
adoption is really
Yeah.
what he's doing is he's cutting through the bullshit of it and going,
Yeah.
like, let's be honest here. Let's lay our cards on the table. We don't need to do this, like, beat around the bush and pretend that this is anything other that it's not. And I think
But
that that's kind of how he views society. And so by him putting on these nice clothes, the nice
yeah.
shoes, the ring, it's him trying to present himself as being able to participate in this,
Yeah.
despite the fact that other people might think that that's vulgar,
Mm-hmm.
because it's almost so sincere in a sense that it's like it's making other people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so when he goes into this adoption agency, or whatever you would call it, and his way of trying to get through to the lady is to essentially present himself as brutally honest and capable, and that he's like, what do you like? Clearly, I would care about the kid. I've gone through this. Like,
Yeah.
like I want to help, but it's this lack of understanding, like you said, where it's like he could never be a part of that world because he can never put on the niceties
The
and the kind of
airs.
like fake
And
air. Yeah, exactly.
it's even interest. I mean, and it sounds kind of harsh, but again, because it's part of his character. But he's in the agency, and he's like, look, I'll take any kind of kid. You got an older kid. You got and he kind of lists through different ethnicities, but he's like really calling attention to something that like definitely actually exists, right? Like,
Yeah.
and the irony is kind of like he would be willing to accept any child, when of
Hmm.
course the reality is that many people that would go into this agency would not accept any child, not just any
Yeah.
child, right? That the ethnicity or age would actually really play into it, which of course does actually highlight the transactional aspect of this, and also highlights that it's not just out of like the goodness of someone's heart that they're doing this, that it's like, no, I
Mm-hmm.
want to, I don't, I'm not trying to help any child. I'm only going to help a certain kind of child, a certain race of child, a certain age of child or gender of child. So interesting. It's like his reflection is actually on this agency is actually like an interesting critique of how this actually is done.
Yeah.
But he's the one that's vulgar, ironically, right? So it's such an effective scene, and there's so many layers there. But and again, I think James Caan just really hits it out of the park. And I think I mentioned, it's I he's not an actor that comes to my mind when I think of like who are like the real pillars of film acting. But
Mm-hmm.
boy, does he crush it in this film, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that and I think that this scene also goes on to kind of, again, we were discussing a lot of this last week about how these are kind of the seeds that go on to shape a lot of Michael Mann's career choices and things like that, whether it's
Right.
literal in the sense that like the equipment was limited, the film stocks were limited, so he was an early adopter of digital, or these stories about these kind of lone wolf men on the outskirts of society that want to break in and want a normal life but truly can never get there. This idea of transaction really, I think, comes up in Miami Vice, his like the film with Colin Farrell,
Yeah.
where what you get is that movie is entirely based around transaction. Every single interaction in that film is transactional in some way, and so it's almost like he took that scene and expanded it into a film, or at least took
Yeah.
the thrust of that scene, the thesis of that scene, and expanded it into a film. Because I think that with Miami Vice, there is no moment in that movie where somebody's not doing something for somebody else to get something. Like that's how the plot progresses in that film. And so I think it's really interesting that you kind of see all of these little elements of things that Michael Mann will go on to explore in more detail further on in his career in all of these. Like it's almost like little vignettes of all these different moments. And so it's interesting for me, having seen Michael Mann's films before this and then coming back to it, and sort of realizing that like, oh yeah, this really does. It's like it's a weirdly a retrospective of all of his like ideas, but prior to him actually executing those ideas.
Yeah.
So it's really it's interesting in that sense. Like it's like he's laying out a blueprint for here's what I'm interested in, and like all of my movies from now on are going to be taking the essence of these moments and the essence of these themes and exploring them in greater detail, but the individual themes, whereas this film kind of weaves them all into like one kind of neat package, which I think is one of the really intriguing parts of this movie. But I think again, this scene just perfectly exemplifies that worldview, that like perhaps these guys that are these lone wolves on the outside of society understand society much better because they're looking in, and they're not like in the box and having to try and like figure out they can see the forest through the trees essentially.
Well, it's just anytime you're an outsider, you have a perspective on the inside that insiders just can't have by the very nature that they're inside that system, whatever that may be. So that's a very good point. That's a really good point. I think, one of the other themes too. I feel like now it's been a bit since I've seen many of Mann's films. It's been a long time since I've seen Ali. It's possible I haven't even seen Ali. It's been a long time since I've seen Last of the Mohicans. A long time since I've seen Public Enemy. Manhunter, it's been quite a few years. So I can't speak to exactly how, what themes reemerge in which of his films, but specific to this film, one of the themes that I feel like I notice, and I think this is also explored in Heat, one could argue, is that it's interesting because we've got Frank. We are both shown, and he explicitly states his hard-earned life theory, right? That he is what there's this great, and the language sometimes is just so beautiful. But what is his phrase? He's like, when he's explaining how he's not going to be owned by anybody. He's not, I don't work for anybody else. I do my own thing. I don't want any, I'm like, God, what does he say? I can't remember now. It's like, I'm Joe something over my own body or something. He's like Do you remember this?
Yeah, like when I do a job, I'm not working for you. I'm paid and I'm out of here. Like it's I think it's the first time that he meets with when they're on the dock, right?
Yeah, when he meets with
Yeah.
Leo, but it's just and I wish I could remember that exact, but it's like, hey, I own my own body. I'm Joe Boss of my own body. It's like he's and so we learn a lot about where he's coming from, but what actually happens in the film is that Leo actually, he does agree, right? He agrees to work for Leo. Well, right off the bat, he's gone against his own rule, right?
Yeah.
Right. We're not even halfway into the film, and why does he do this? Well, it's because he feels like he's run out of time, and in order to make his dreams happen, in order to have the family and the child and the wife and the house and these things, in order to have that American dream, so to speak, or the Canadian dream, perhaps, depending on where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
um, he's compromising his own rules. But and what it's interesting that so for however much conviction he had, right, in this other way to operate, however smart he was, however capable he was, the reality is that none of that ends up saving him. Like, he still gets owned by Leo. He's right, and there's this beautiful scene where they end up doing the heist, the second heist, the main heist is successful, and he goes to get his cut, and Leo says, oh, he gets just a tiny percentage of what the cut was supposed to be, and Leo says, well, oh, it's because I put you in on this real estate deal. And Frank's like, no. I told you before. I just want my cash. I do this one job. I want my cash. I'm done. I'm out. I'm not. That's it. And Leo's like, well, where's the gratitude, buddy? I put you in this real estate deal. We're in this for the long haul. We're pals. We're family. And then and then we end up going further. He's like, look, you're not that guy that you were before, where you got nothing to lose. You're just out of jail. I own all the paper on your life. The child that he ends up eventually getting, because of course the adoption agency situation doesn't pan out. Leo gets him his own. The child is Leo, is from Leo. The house is Leo's. Now he's working for Leo. His money is tied up with Leo. So he's literally owned. I mean, it's like, for as much as he says, I've got my hard earned theory of living life, and I'm never gonna, he ends up, the exact opposite ends up happening to him. And I almost get a sense that, as one of the ways I feel like you could look at it is that it's, no matter what we tell ourselves, no matter how rigid we may try to make ourselves with our own rules or whatever we've learned, it's there's a certain amount of like inevitable fate that befalls us all, that you can't go through life that way. That's not how it can ever work. And maybe you kind of pulled something else different out of that, but it's just interesting to me. And that the same thing basically kind of happens in Heat, right, where he's like, hey, here's the whole thing. I don't, he's got his rule. Now he doesn't really, De Niro's character really doesn't deviate from that so much, I don't think. He actually kind of follows through and leaves the one potential like love of his life.
Yeah, he's almost so dogmatic about it that's since his downfall in that film.
But it's just interesting to me that both of these films kind of explore that, and they kind of have really similar outcomes, in a sense, that they have to basically burn their whole life down and walk off into the night.
When you feel the heat coming around the corner.
Now, one guy does it literally, in the sense that Khan does survive. He ends up, but he has to blow everything in his life up.
He burns his life down. Yeah,
he burns his life down. He blows up the house. He tells Jesse to leave with his child and don't tell me where you're going, and we're never going to see each other. And he literally has to do it in a way that's so aggressive in order to get her to leave, that he has to basically deny his love for her. He's like, I don't love you. I don't. This isn't going to work. This is done. We're done. We're done. And he has to actually be aggressive and mean to get her to leave. He burns the house down. He destroys the car dealership. He destroys the bar. And then, of course, he ends up, infiltrating Leo's kind of HQ, his house, killing all of his minions, and ultimately killing Leo, and walks off into the night. And of course, De Niro ends up dying in heat, but in effect, his life's burned down too. So I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on this? It's so many different ways I feel like you could kind of approach this. Is he making a statement of, well, look, this is not a very successful way to go through life. If you were obsessed with something to say, or if you're so willing to leave out so many aspects of your life, like relationships and friendship and love, and, that you're destined to be alone or dead. And maybe those things are one and the same almost. That's maybe one way you could look at it. I'm curious your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, what's interesting is that it's like the dichotomy there of what is these two characters in, like, if you're comparing De Niro and Heat to Khan here, Khan sort of gets away with it because he almost realizes his mistake and goes back to his principles. De Niro doesn't get away because he sort of does the same thing. It's like De Niro doesn't win because had he just walked away with his girlfriend in that, he would have gotten away with it, which maybe maybe that was Mann's intention there, is kind of exploring both sides of these outcomes. But I think that it's what I see Mann kind of approaching here is just this idea that it's like you almost can't teach an old dog new tricks. That Khan has been going through this life, or Frank has been going through this life. That this is him.
And that's kind of what I mean by fate. Yeah, that's kind of what I mean by
exactly.
fate.
It's like any chance at break, or any attempt at breaking out of your fate, to use that term, is going to be met with, like, violently. Like, it's going to shake things up in your life so violently that you're just going to have to end up back where you started anyway. Yeah. And so obviously, despite the fact that Frank ultimately is, in a literal sense, victorious in this film, like, he gets his revenge.
It's a great loss. I mean, it's really
exactly. It's a very hollow victory.
Yeah.
He loses everything that he.
Yeah, everything.
Like, it's almost like life It's like life proving to him that vision board.
You'll never have it. You'll never have it.
That you are poison to that.
Yeah.
Like, that if you try to eat that life, if you try to put that put that jacket on, then you're going to kill yourself. Like, you're going to die from that, because it's like a poison to you, even though you want it so bad. And I think that's really the reason that interests me, is because it's also, like, even in the deal that he's kind of offered, in this kind of, like, hey, we're family, this kind of thing, like, that kind of is a parallel in real life to somebody in a sense, like, selling out and working for, maybe like a big corporation. You see all this happen all the time, of people who are trying to be, independent in their lives. That happens very frequently in the arts, but it happens, outside of that too.
Everywhere.
Who's like an entrepreneur trying to make their own living, and then this feeling that you're kind of selling out.
Well, and it's not much different than what happens in the real world, right? I mean, you hired by an employer, and now they're taking the largest cut of your profit, generally speaking. Whatever money you're making for whatever organization, they're taking the lion's share of it, right?
Yeah.
You're only making a small percentage. And they own the paper on your life. In the United States, at least, your health insurance, your dental insurance, your vision insurance is often unaffordably expensive, except through your employer. So literally, your employer owns your health in certain ways, here in the United States, at least. Your mortgage on your house.
I was going to say that's based on your income.
If you don't go to work, there's your house, it's gone. All the paper on so many things in your life are really owned by someone else for most people, for most of us. And so it's really not that much different than.
Well, and that's what I mean when I say that it's very interesting that Mann plays this, he is distilling the real world down into these characters in a very, very authentic way. And that's kind of, again, we sort of said this earlier about how, James Caan, like Frank's view of the world is just distilled down. It's transactional, and which is true. It's the vast majority of the world is transactional, and so he's just taking that sheen off of it, and saying, why do we have to like go through all these like silly little games when we all know what we're talking about? And that's ultimately what Mann is kind of saying to the audience in a sense, which is just like, this is really, in a lot of ways how you're living, maybe with less of the violence and the like overt.
Well, the violence is there too.
Your life.
The violence is there too.
It's just not literally on. Yeah.
It's just it's got the sheen. Like there's a kind of violence to like taking away someone's health insurance. That is a kind of violence in a sense, right? Like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are just as. And I'm using violence in a kind of a poetic sense as opposed to a literal sense necessarily, right? But there's a lot of ways that violence could be perpetrated or used as leverage against somebody that's not just hitting them in the head with a baseball bat, right? I mean, there's economic and there's a lot of different things. So and of course that's what a wonderful story does. I mean, that's what a good story does, of course, right? You've got these characters that most of us don't have any experience with, anywhere near what James Caan's life is. Most of us, many of us have not done time. We aren't thieves. We don't crack safes, but it's just a different lens through which to see so many of, the aspects of the human condition, of course, that we all do experience on a daily basis. And it's a big part of what makes this successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was just going to ask, as we've kind of, I think we've touched on so much in this film. I think we've given it actually more time than any other film that we've talked about, if I'm not mistaken, as we hit nearly the 40-minute mark or so on this episode. But I just wanted to kind of take a minute. Was there anything else that you wanted to speak to? Or was that, I know sometimes you're kind of more tuned in to a soundtrack than I might be sometimes. And I was just curious if you had any more thoughts with that. It's one of the standouts for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, I love Tangerine Dream.
Wait. Hold on. Am I boring you? Am I boring you, Cullen?
I'm just kidding.
I think that's the first.
You know what? I don't think I've ever yawned during an episode before.
I was like, geez. Now, what is our audience supposed to think?
Well, we should tell the audience that we've been doing this as a marathon. We've been recording this straight through from the last episode, and then they'll understand.
How are we supposed to think our audience is going to be enjoying this if you yourself are just yawning, young man? Okay. Well,
no, yeah, I think that's a first. I think that's.
Okay, but outside of calling you out on yawning, I'm sorry to interject. Yes, please do go on.
No, I just was going to say that I love the I love Tangerine Dream. We've done films with their soundtracks before.
Yeah.
We've done two.
Several.
I think we've done 3 O'Clock High and Sorcerer.
Yep.
And perhaps even more than that. I don't know. My memory.
Those
we've
are
done
at
almost
least
100 episodes. So
at least those two. Yep.
So I love that. Like, I mean, to move over to Friedkin for a second, just because obviously Sorcerer.
Why not?
Tangerine
Friedkin.
Dream.
Sure.
I one of the things that I love in his talks about making To Live and Die in L.A. is that he talks about how Wang Chung was originally just supposed to do an opening number, like for the title cards and things like that, for those opening credits. And then they were like, well, can we just do some more music for you? And if you don't like it, whatever. And he was like, okay, probably won't use it, but whatever. And then they did this amazing soundtrack, and he ended up using it for the whole thing. And I see Tangerine Dream in a lot of those ways where it's like, and it's the same thing with like, so even going very contemporary, like Daft Punk, and like, I know like 9 Inch Nails and stuff like that. You get, sometimes when you get bands that are so used to infusing story into their music, to write music for literal stories, you get this like really magical result from it. And I think it's so refreshing to hear stuff like this today, especially because you have, I have a lot of criticisms of the way that like Hans Zimmer approaches film scoring and things like that as this almost like big giant enterprise where he just like, I think a lot of people don't even realize that half the movies his name is on, he didn't actually compose the music for. He was just like producing the soundtrack with a million other composers in there, and he has this like school of composers that he just kind of throws out, and
it's
goes
like
okay.
Benjamin Franklin with his inventions.
And to me, it all sounds the same. Like it just, you have such a narrow bandwidth of of music these days for movies, and it genuinely is one thing that really bothers me, because I think like a good soundtrack is one of the most important things about a movie, or sometimes the absence of one too, like when to not have one.
Sure.
And so when you hear something like this score by Tangerine Dream, and of course Tangerine Dream has continued doing music for like music or video games and films and things like that, a whole bunch of different things. I think that the benefit of getting someone who's like from outside the world of film music is so clear, because they're bringing something that is so unique, a sound that is so unique. They don't understand the rules. Maybe they don't understand the rules to film music, or like the cliches or the tropes of what a soundtrack should sound like. So it ends up sounding completely unique, and yet giving Michael Mann this entire vibe that I think he's carried on throughout his career. Even Elliot Goldenthal, who is a film composer who did the score for Heat, you can tell that Elliot Goldenthal is like very much bought into this idea that like, I'm gonna make this like really cool, almost like rock sound. Like there's so many electric guitars in the Heat soundtrack that are making these really like experimental noises, and I think it kind of really did define a lot of what Michael Mann is known for. Like you can listen to you listen to any soundtrack and you can see a guy looking out a window in like blue light over the ocean with a gun on the table behind. That's just like the image that comes to mind when you hear any Michael Mann soundtracks. So I think Tangerine Dream's score here is fantastic.
Well, and look, I'm not a scholar of like music history or music or soundtracks in general, but it's the area where I maybe have like the least technical, background or understanding, right? I've never written a score, in the same way that I've acted, and I've shot, and I've operated camera, and I've edited, and I've done all these other things, but I've never actually written a score, much less recorded one. So I always feel a little deficient in this area. But I mean, as an audience though, I kind of know what I think works and what I think doesn't, etc. But it's interesting too, you've got to think back to when this film was released. I mean, this film was released in 1981. Now again, I'm no expert, but it's like the kind of music that Tangerine Dream was making, this ambient electronic music, that these soundscapes I think were relatively new in this era. I mean, I think maybe you had somebody maybe like Brian Eno would be one of the few people that would kind of come to my mind who would maybe producing ambient electronic, or even like music.
Vangelis.
Right, with Blade Runner, which is even after this though. And I it's funny, is I don't know, this is kind of a random kind of story, but maybe it's connected. I'll try to find a way to connect it. It's like when I was in college. So we're talking mid-90s. So electronic music and ambient music was more mainstream at that point, much more so than, here in the early 80s. But I had I just picked up somewhere, I don't even remember where, it was like a just a two CD, back when, music was on CDs way back in the day. And compilation, just various artists of ambient music, right? So it was just the 2 CD set, and literally I think it was just called Ambient 1 and 2. You know what I mean? It was but it was just a 2-disc set of random. So it had some Brian Eno stuff on there, a bunch of stuff I don't remember, and I couldn't tell you what it was, but it had the Tangerine Dream track from the major heist that plays through. I mean, you've almost got 10 minutes of this track that plays through during the heist in the film. And where it kind of starts, where Khan is throws the tracking device into the bus, and then that whole setup of all of that. And that was a track that stood out so much to me. I had no idea though who Tangerine. I had not yet really explored Tangerine Dream as soundtrack, as composers of soundtracks and any of this stuff. I just hadn't put all that together yet, even then, when I was a freshman in college. So it was so funny when I finally watched Thief, but was oh my God, that's that song from that ambient thing. And I don't know, and I was holy crap, I was listening to part of the soundtrack of Thief this whole time, and and it really stood out to me, and I really thought the track was unique and enjoyed it, and and here it is this whole time. So it's just kind of wild. Anyway, I guess the point is that I think for many people, just lay audiences, this soundtrack would have been so unique in 81. I mean, it was unique to me in 94. So I can only imagine, and maybe this is why the Razzie, because it was so much maybe ahead of its time, that just the different instrumentation, the different sounds, some of it's almost kind of atonal, and obviously it's vastly different than like a Williams score or your traditional like orchestral score that you might have had in a more traditional film. So, but it's strange because of course there's nothing in this film that's happening that's kind of otherworldly, but the soundscape is often almost otherworldly, and the juxtaposition of the two is it's so interesting how those come together. It really makes for a really unique experience. So
it just feels like a city at night,
Yeah, but there's an alienness to it.
Yeah, but I mean, and that's what I mean in terms of like,
which is
sometimes it feels otherworldly when you're like out at night at like 3 a.m. and it feels like you're in a different dimension or something.
Yeah, very true. I mean, especially if you're pulling heist, it probably feels like you're in a parallel universe, I would imagine.
The wet streets and
Right. All right. Well, unless you have anything else that kind of sticks out to you about the film that we haven't discussed, I think
we'll be back for part 3.
We'll be back for part 3. Probably not, but hey, for those of you who listened to 2 hours of us discussing Thief, wow, thank you. We appreciate you. We enjoyed talking about it, and it'll be your turn to pick the next film. So I look forward to that. We'll see what Cullen comes up with, and I guess until then, everybody, we wish you all the best, and we'll see you on the flip side.
Bye bye.